Welcome to PhotographyBB's Artistry Actions for Photoshop. I'm Dave Searam, the Editor-in-Chief of PhotographyBB, and in this video, I'm going to demonstrate the PhotographyBB SquickerArt Photoshop action. SquickerArt is a brand new action that happens to be my personal favorite. I developed this action after being inspired by the incredible artwork from the slightly dark children's book, The Squicker Wonkers, by Evangeline Lilly from the TV show Lost. The artwork in the book appears on this beautiful, grungy paper background with ink spots dripped randomly, along with this lovely green blotch that appears behind parts of the main sketches. This action takes that inspiration and creates a fantastically strange sketch drawing that allows you to retain color in selected areas of your image. So before we dive into the SquickerArt action tutorial, here are some quick but important points. So before we begin, a brief word on compatibility. Due to the way that Photoshop works, these actions are not compatible with every version of Photoshop. We've created these to work on Photoshop CC 2015 and newer to utilize some of the newest innovations that Adobe has included in their more recent versions of Photoshop. Additionally, because of the way that actions work, these are only compatible with English language versions of Photoshop. Our PhotographyBB artistry actions are designed to work with a variety of image resolutions and sizes. However, due to the way that Photoshop filters work, the results will look different when running any Photoshop action on high-res versus low-res images. We have designed the PhotographyBB artistry actions to work with high-res images, either RAW or JPEG files, shot with a DSLR camera. Additionally, some of our actions include a version of the action optimized for lower res images, either shot with a smartphone or a point-and-shoot camera. When running the action, choose either the high or low res action option depending on the image you are working with. The ideal image size for optimal results is anywhere between 3000 to 5000 pixels along the long edge of your image. Another point to note is that our actions are entirely non-destructive. Every one of our actions will create a duplicate file, leaving your original image files completely untouched. So once you've downloaded your PhotographyBB artistry actions, your first step is to install them. Installing actions into Photoshop is relatively easy, but before you do so, I'd like to make one suggestion. I like to keep all of my Photoshop actions in one place, separate from the default download folder that your system probably receives them in when you download them for the first time. For myself, I like to create one main folder on my hard drive, in this case, the Pictures folder on my Mac. Inside this main Pictures folder, I then create three subfolders, one for Lightroom presets, Photos, which contains every single photograph that I have on my computer, and one more for Photoshop Actions. I do this to keep everything in one place. It makes things much easier if I ever need to reinstall Photoshop one day, or even when I upgrade to a new hard drive or a new computer. This way I can just copy over either my entire Pictures folder to a new computer or just the Photoshop actions themselves. Now this is just my personal preference, but I've found it to be a huge time saver over the years, and I would highly recommend this storage hierarchy for you too. Once you've downloaded the actions to your computer, you can now install them into Photoshop. So to do this, open Photoshop and go to the menu, Window, Actions. When the Actions panel appears, click on the little drop-down arrow menu and go to Load Actions. Then navigate to the action you would like to install and click Open. Your action will now be ready to use inside the Photoshop Actions panel. Okay, once you've installed the PhotographyBB SquickerArt action, it will appear in the Photoshop Actions panel. If you don't see the Actions panel in your toolbar, you can make it visible by going to the menu Window, Actions. This set contains three actions that operate in a two-step procedure. The first action, Step 1, allows you to choose the areas of your image where you would like to retain color in the final sketch. The next two actions make up for Step 2, and as you can see here, one version is for high-res images and the other is for low-res images. So the first thing we do is open up a photograph that you would like to turn into a sketch. One of the best things about this action, which is one of the reasons that it's my favorite, is that it works so well on so many types of photographs. So I'm going to use this image here. So the first thing I do is click on the Step 1 Select Focus action and click the play button at the bottom of the Actions panel. Close the dialog box that appears, and then use the brush tool to paint over your photograph, covering the areas that you want as colored areas in the final image. So anything left unbrushed here will simply fade out to the paper texture in the sketch area. Now feel free to adjust your brush size and hardness at your discretion, but be sure to keep the brush opacity at 100%. If for any reason it's not at 100%, you can press the 0 key, which will increase the brush opacity to 100% for you. Also, you can paint over as many different areas as you would like for different effects. In fact, the whole image is going to be transformed into a sketch, so I would actually recommend going easy on the paint job, which again is only going to be the areas where color is retained in the final image. So I'm going to paint over this image like this, just very light, and that's good. Okay, now after you have this brushed area over your photograph, select the appropriate high or low res version of the Step 2 SquickerArt action in the Actions panel and click play. Now this action is a little bit CPU intensive, especially on high res images like this one here. So depending on the speed and configuration of your computer, this action may take a few moments to run to completion. So I'm going to pause and speed up the process here for the sake of this demonstration. Okay, so once the action is complete, you can close the dialog box by pressing stop. And I'm going to just close the Actions panel out of the way here and zoom in to 100% so I can point out some of the really cool features that we've built into this effect. So the first is this gorgeous paper background. Now there's a subtle parchment type feel to it with this halftone texture and these strange little splatters on the paper. Now the next thing you can see is that our sketch is not just a single outline of the subject in the photo. There are multiple sketch lines, which lends a more realistic and rough sketch look to the final image. Now we've added these cool little scratches to the sketch again to give it a more character rather than just having this simple pencil line sketch. And in addition, you can see the dark areas of the image here have this long line stroke shading effect, which makes for a more interesting drawing for sure. So you can see the areas here where the color is retained and where it is just the sketch part without color. Now next is the real signature of the SquickerArt visual, and that's this green blotch behind the main subject here. Now you have the ability to change the color of this blotch or even reduce or remove the effect depending on your preference. And lastly, in addition to the splatter drops on the paper background, we also have these really cool colored paint splatter drops as well. Now every single detail that I just pointed out, all of them are completely and very easily editable. So let's dive into the Layers palette and have some fun. Now you're going to see several layer groups inside the Layers palette, and these can all be toggled open by clicking the little arrow toggle beside each group name. So the top folder includes a black and white color conversion and 10 color options for lending different filter effects to your final image. So the next texture folder contains all of the background effects. Now you can adjust the visibility and or the opacity of the vignette layer. Next is the old paper texture, which can be toggled on or off, or you can adjust its opacity to your liking. And next is the noise texture, which is very subtle to begin with, but again, it can be turned on or off or reduced. And next is the halftone texture, which we're seeing here, which have the same visibility or opacity options. And now the next layer is hidden by default, and this is for adding even more splatter to the background detail of the paper. So if I move to an area here that's mostly paper, well, this is good here, and toggle that layer on and off, you can see the effect of adding more splatter. So I'm going to leave that off. And the final layer in this group controls the default amount of splatter on the paper. So again, you can turn that on or off or adjust the opacity. So I'm going to close up this group, and now we can look at the next group, which is the Sketch Effects group. Now this group contains several layers, and each one of them can be controlled either by visibility and or the opacity. So the first two contain the white scratch details, and the rest of the layers in here contain all of the sketch lines. Now these are all named after the different levels of sketch detail, so take some time and really play around with the opacities here, especially if you would like to strengthen or reduce some of the effects of the sketch lines. You can have so much fun in here, so please do play around to all of your heart's content. There's a lot that can be done in this group. Now the next group is our Color Adjustment Layers group, which actually contains 3 different groups inside the main folder here. Now we've done this to give you 3 choices for how the color is retained around the edges of where you painted over your image in step 1. So here's how this works. So the default is our rough edges setting. And that's what you see here where the color is applied. See how the color edges are kind of hard and jagged? Now I can turn the visibility of the rough edges group to off and turn on the next one, which is the sprayed edges group. And now you can see the rough edges are gone and the color appears to be more like a sprayed effect around the edges. So let's see that again. Here's the rough and here's the sprayed. Pretty cool, right? So now the last group is the exact mask group, which will apply the color edges exactly how you painted them, whether with a soft or hard brush. Now this would only be used when you want a very, very precise area to retain color. So I think the sprayed looks pretty good on this one, so I'm going to leave that one visible. Now inside each of these groups are the actual color layers. Now we've done an exhaustive job to make sure that the color looks great by default, but if for any reason you want to change up the amount or blending of the color layers, you can open any of these 3 groups to play around with the opacities and blending mode of each color layer inside. The next layer group is our Splash Effects group, and this controls the various splash effects on the subject of your image, not the background paper splashes that we looked at previously. So the first is Color Splatter, which are these little colored drops you see around the image. So you can turn the visibility of these on or off, or adjust the opacity up or down to your liking. The next is the Warm Color Layers, which adds a subtle splash of color around the outside edges of the area that you originally painted. Now this is randomized each time the action is run, so you'll get different effects each and every time you use this action, which is really cool and one of the unique things about this action. And the last layer in this group is the beautiful green blotch. Now here you can either turn it on, off, or reduce its opacity, or if you're feeling especially creative, you can double click it to open it as a smart object. And from there, you can then double click on the color overlay layer effects, change the color to something else, maybe like a purple perhaps. And we'll close that. And we'll close the smart object, save it, and voila! You now have a purple blotch instead of the green. And lastly, we have the paper group, where you can make adjustments to the color, saturation, and lightness of the background paper. You can double click the Adjust Paper Hue Saturation icon here, and when the dialog pops up, you can change the look of the paper. So the hue slider will adjust the color like this. The saturation color will either intensify or desaturate the paper color. And again, this is just the paper color, not the painted areas. And the lightness slider will allow you to darken or lighten the paper to your preference. And there you have it. That's a quick demo of how to use our PhotographyBB SquickerArt action. We think you're absolutely going to love transforming your photographs into gorgeous sketches. Everyone is going to ask how on earth you were able to do this, and that can be our secret. So thanks again for checking out this demo tutorial. Grab your SquickerArt action below and have a lot of fun turning your photographs into artwork. Enjoy!